foreign analysts believe South Korea's nuclear submarine ambition may raise the risks of an underwater arms race here in Asia. Other analysts here in the country are quick to point out that the world's two superpowers appear to have omitted the pursuit of denuclearization of North Korea from their security strategies. Hope your work week is off to a good start. It's Monday, December 8th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. Now today we touch upon defense-related policies here in South Korea and those of its partners. For this I have Ruy Valdes with Spanish news agency EFE Spain here in the studio. Ruy, welcome back.
Nice to be here, Sunhee.
I also have Professor Choi Hyun Jin at Kyung Hee University joining our talk virtually. Professor Choi, it's great to have you with us.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Right, we shall start here in the studio. Ruy, let's begin with details of the recent article, I believe, by Reuters that raises concerns of an underwater arms race here in Asia amid South Korea's pursuit of nuclear-powered submarines.
Right, well, what President Lee Jae-myung called one of his administration's biggest achievements in this article is discussed as, well, it might be an achievement, but it also could trigger an type of arms race in the region by the main countries around that are looking at what happened to Seoul in this green light by the US, and they will try, or it's possible that they will try to catch up with these technologies either by building their own nuclear power submarines like in the case of Japan, or China to strengthen overall their military capacities because of the whole tensions in the regions, and because even though South Korea is framing it as a way to strengthen their defense capabilities and deterrence against North Korea, many pundits, including in this article, are mentioning that it might have other objectives, especially for the US, by strengthening Korea, to deter also China. So in this context, what we know also, or what at least in the side of North Korea has said that they're developing their own nuclear-powered submarine. This has not been entirely confirmed, but there's many indications that Russia is helping them to develop this technology. And of course, China, it's becoming more observant of how this turns out, or let's say their attention was clearly there when there was this announcement, because of course, since the U.S. is announcing this strategic flexibility, alliance modernization, that it's pushing South Korea to have a broader expansion on the role of the U.S. forces here and also the forces in terms of other regional problems outside of North Korea. Of course, that's on Beijing interest. And according to the article and other indications, they say Japan actually was very surprised when they gave this green light to Seoul to build these submarines, and now their Ministry of Defense and discussion inside the country has pointed out that, well, now there's an option that Japan also tries to develop these submarines that they don't have, just to finalize, to take into account that only United States, Russia, China, UK, France, and India actually have this type of submarines, and Australia will soon also have. And if South Korea develops, which is the plan, this submarine, it will be the first non-nuclear weapon state to operate such vessels.
Right, so at present we have 6 countries that possess nuclear-powered submarines, and South Korea is hoping to join those countries. Professor Choi, do you believe South Korea's nuclear submarine ambitions may fuel an underwater arms race?
That is a very important question. I generally agree with Ruy, but I have to emphasize South Korea's official position now. The nuclear-powered submarine is not about nuclear weapon, and they are response to North Korea's underwater missile threat. Okay, and the South Korea will stay within a strict non-proliferation regime. So there is no question about this official position of the South Korean government. However, the reality is more complex. A nuclear submarine does not only operate near the Korean peninsula, its range is far wider, and also it can stay underwater much longer, and it can even track Chinese submarine activity in distant waters. And that's why the President Lee Jae-myung mentioned China's submarine activity when he spoke to President Trump in Gyeongju. So that's why some people say like this: if Seoul is really focusing on deterring just North Korea, other systems such as Hyunmoo-5 ballistic missile and F-35K fighter jet would be more cost-effective. So the choice of a nuclear submarine indicate a much larger role for South Korea as an American ally in East Asia. So there is a famous line in the Spider-Man movie: with greater power comes greater responsibility. I think this reflects our situation very well. If South Korea gains this advanced weapon system, our responsibility in regional security will naturally grow. So will the expectation from the United States. So the important question is, will it really provoke an arms race with China or Japan? So, of course, this is not the goal of South Korea. However, we must admit the risk exists. So I think the key is transparency and calm dialogue with our neighbors so that this weapon system is seen as a defense, not as an expansion.
Right, and speaking about China, exactly or roughly about a month after South Korea's request for nuclear-powered submarines to Washington and Washington's related approval, China released a new policy paper that analysts believe accepts North Korea's possession of nuclear weapons. Could you tell us a bit about this paper, Ruy, and the reason behind this belief among analysts?
Yes, this omission of the term denuclearization in this paper of China, it's was reported first by South China Morning Post, and interviewing many experts that say this could mean a tacit acceptance. It's not official acceptance, but a tacit acceptance of North Korea as a nuclear status amid the strengthening of the relationships between those two countries, as we saw in September in the military parade in Beijing, where Kim Jong-un had a place of honor next to Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. The fact that when they met, denuclearization was not talked about. So pundits are saying that this seems to be in line of this new relation that we're seeing recently. This white paper of defense, what gets the attention of everybody is that the term denuclearization was included in several years before 2005, 2017, and early of the 2024. Now, instead of calling it instead of calling denuclearization, it's called resolving the Korea Peninsula issue through political means, urging all sides to avoid aggressive deterrence. So this is a major shift, at least in the rhetoric or on the use of these terms by China. At the same time, they say, well, this could be a strategic shift, now saying that China is prioritizing competition with Washington and regional alignment with North Korea and Russia, which is also, as we will talk a little bit later, could be comparable or in some parts similar to what U.S. did in their own defense paper that we will talk about. By this, as I mentioned, analysts are not saying that this is official, but it's like a pragmatic acceptance of this nuclear status, something that North Korea has been looking for since many, many years, insisting recently, some years ago also, that they will not give up on their own nuclearization and that they will not give up their nuclear weapons. And we're seeing China taking this new strategic decision to show that they might be on Pyongyang's side in this matter.
Right, and staying with diction, Professor Choi, the Lee Jae-myung administration appears to have chosen the phrase "a peninsula without nuclear weapons" over the word denuclearization with regard to its North Korea policy. What do you suppose the broader implications of this particular phrase, Professor Choi?
Okay, the phrase denuclearization has only one direction. So it means only North Korea must abandon its nuclear weapon. So naturally, the Pyongyang does not like this kind of expression, and as it hears like pressure, not a dialogue. But the new phrase, Korean Peninsula without nuclear weapon, is more balanced. It means both South and North Korea will not have a nuclear weapon. Okay. It also shows that South Korea will not build its own weapon or host American weapon in the future. And this is important, especially nowadays, because many major actors are closely watching the South Korea's nuclear debate nowadays. So some surveys show that almost half of the South Korean people believe that this country needs its own nuclear weapon for deterrence. So it is true that other countries, some people, worry that South Korea may one day build its own weapon. So also the nuclear power, the submarine system is adding more attention nowadays. And therefore, a stronger Navy could lead some people to believe that South Korea is stepping towards some nuclear capability in the future. And therefore, this new phrase, Korean Peninsula without nuclear weapon, is important because it has two goals. The first, it means South Korean government will maintain our long-term vision of a nuclear-free North Korea. And secondly, it also reassures the world that even with a nuclear-powered submarine, South Korea will not pursue its own nuclear weapon in the future.
Right. And staying with policy documents, Ruy, as you mentioned earlier, the Trump administration's latest security strategy, which was released late last week, I believe this makes no mention of North Korea. Could you walk us through the main points of Washington's latest strategy document?
Yes, again, in the same line, it caught the attention of everyone that the national security strategy, for the first time since North Korea started their nuclear program, as far as we know, it does not mention North Korea at all. These deprioritizations caught the attention, again, of everyone. There could be multiple interpretations of why this is happening. Some people could say that maybe Washington is getting ready to accept North Korea as a nuclear state. Some others just saying that maybe it's a little bit of a bait for North Korea to say, okay, they're open to the idea of accepting us as a nuclear state, so maybe we could engage in dialogue. But yeah, the fact that, for example, in 2017, there was 17 references to North Korea in the national security strategy, that with Biden in 2022, there was 3 references. Well, this is actually important. And also, there's another factor. There were some clarifications that I will talk about, but there's another factor that happened with Obama administration, that many critics says that the fact that they did not prioritize North Korea, that they ignored North Korea, in fact, gave them a little bit of space for them to keep developing and improving their military assets. In this way, we're wondering how prioritized will be Pyongyang, because if it's fully ignored, then we are sure that we will see these types of criticisms arise again. Being all that said, yesterday, National Security Advisor Min Sunhee and today the acting ambassador of U.S. in South Korea, they clarified that denuclearization and North Korea are still priorities in the U.S. agenda. They remind, or especially the ambassador today, remind that after the summit, or some days after the summit between Donald Trump and Lee Jae-myung, the latest one, in the joint fact sheet, they included that they were still going to pursue denuclearization of the peninsula. It's very interesting what Professor Choi mentions, in the sense that that not talking about denuclearization at all, it will apply for both Koreas. Many people are not talking yet about that, but I actually think that's a very good point. That could be also another point of discussion, like what's going to happen with that? Like, you are actually not talking about it at all. Does this mean that South Korea maybe in the future can adopt a nuclear weapon? We don't know. And so, yeah, well, we saw, again, in terms of relating it a little bit what we were talking at the beginning, that the U.S. strategy or priorities are more focused on China, regional security, the issue of Taiwan. And Yeah, this might mean what many pundits have been pointing out, or many signals that have been that arose before, that maybe the U.S. is looking for this new strategic flexibility of the U.S. Forces here in South Korea to attend regional problems or tensions related to China more than North Korea. Is this an open door for Kim Jong-un to say, okay, maybe it's my time to engage in dialogue because they're not going to be pushing me or sanctioning me as before? Well, we will need to wait and see. But clearly, what we see in the national security strategy of the U.S. is that the concern, at least, is more regional than North Korea.
Right. So for now, then, Professor Choi, the Trump administration's security document does not mention North Korea, but as Ruy said, it mentions Taiwan and the importance of conflict prevention with China. This being said, Professor Choi, what are the risks of South Korea being drawn into a hostile confrontation between these two superpowers over Taiwan in the foreseeable future?
It's a very critical and important question for us. So opinion polls in South Korea shows that the most South Korean people do not want to be pulled into a Taiwan war, and they prefer a limited logistical support from the rear area rather than sending our force to the front line. But the reality on the ground is changing. For example, the General Bronson, the commander of U.S. Force Korea, has called the Pyeongtaek military base as the closest American base to Beijing. So that means in a Taiwan crisis, the U.S. force stationed in South Korea could be used for deterrence or even for operations against China. So in this worst case scenario, the South Korea could become a core battlefield area, even if we don't want it. So that is the real potential danger, being drawn into a great power armed clash because of our geographical location and alliance ties with the United States. And for this reason, I think diplomacy is very important. The first goal of our diplomacy should be to stop any war from starting. And for example, nowadays there is an ongoing some dispute between China and Japan, and therefore it is important for South Korea and other countries we can work quietly to reduce this ongoing tension between the two countries, to keep their disputes from getting out of control. So once a war breaks out in East Asia, it would be very difficult or impossible for South Korea to stay neutral. And therefore, I think we need a strong deterrence and active diplomacy to prevent potential conflict between US and China before it ever reaches the Korean Peninsula.
Right, and essentially that appeared to be the stance of President Lee Jae-myung while he was speaking to the foreign media last week, I believe, Ruy. Now, with regard to the conflict that Professor Choi mentioned between Japan and China, President Lee Jae-myung spoke about the importance of seeking solidarity instead of taking sides. You were at that conference, I believe. What are your thoughts with regard to the President's approach to diplomacy?
Well, in general, our interpretation of President Lee Jae-myung's words is, of course, that he's very in line to what Professor Choi just explained. He is putting South Korea more or prioritizing a role of coordinator, of mediator, which is actually maybe it was not expected that tensions will arise so fast just after a new prime minister took power in Japan. But at South Korea, or the administration of Lee Jae-myung, was to prioritizing this role of South Korea of being more like an international mediator or with different events that we saw this year. So yeah, it was like a very deliberate neutrality in the words of President Lee Jae-myung when he says that taking sides will intensify conflict. So it would be better to seek coexistence and, whenever possible, even act as mediators between these two countries. The news keep coming up yesterday, there was these complaints that Chinese jets lock radar in other Japanese aircrafts. China is saying they're exaggerating. But the thing is still going on and on. I think, as I mentioned, well, not only for the administration of President Jae-myung, but also for anyone, it was hard to see that the Prime Minister Takaichi of Japan was going to make these statements so fast, and then all of a sudden, both countries are in the middle of these tensions that one could say is going to be very hard for at least the Japan side to say sorry or take back the words, because they just started the government. So they could be thinking this could be a signal of weakness if we start on that. On the side of South Korea, as Professor Choi already explained, of course, for South Korea, it's better that this tension is not there. They don't want to put at risk any matter of security or regional security. And if it was for the President Jae-myung or anybody, most people in this country, the best thing would be that this tension stop and this is settled. Even a little bit before this statement by Prime Minister Takaichi happened, or she said these words, the tensions, I would say, in the region, the dialogue was not what was, you can even say, a little bit friendly. But now, again, we're in this, in the middle of this, and of course, South Korea is always concerned about what happens between these two countries.
Right. That is here in East Asia, of course. Meanwhile, Professor Choi, last week there were a series of high-profile diplomatic encounters with Russia's Vladimir Putin traveling to India to meet with his counterpart Narendra Modi, and French President Emmanuel Macron sitting down in China with his counterpart Xi Jinping. Observers believe, Professor, that we are truly witnessing a world where leaders are choosing to embrace an interest-based, pragmatic approach to diplomacy. What are the pros and cons of this reality, do you think?
Yes, we are seeing a new kind of diplomacy. So all the leaders moving based on their interests, not ideology. So, but this is not negative, I think. A multipolar and interest-based, flexible diplomacy can provide more room for negotiation and more space to choose their alliance partner. But however, the timing is unusual. So we are in the middle of a so-called new Cold War with a deepening US-China rivalry and competition. But however, in this tense moment, the major powers are not lining up behind one bloc. This is a very interesting development. And they are hedging, balancing, and talking to all sides. And I think there is one important reason. There is less credibility in the US-led alliance system. So allies of the United States sometimes do not fully trust American plans in the future. They are not entirely leaving the United States. However, they want to reduce the risk in case US policy changes suddenly. So there is some downside here. If this kind of trend grows, the US-led alliance system will lose its power and credibility. So there will be some less unity, some reduced deterrence power. So if everyone acts based on their own interests, without shared rules or commitments, conflict may be harder to stop. So for this reason, I think, flexible diplomacy is okay. But however, this kind of diplomacy can contribute to peace and stability, and only if major powers such as the United States will restore trust and credibility within its own alliance system.
All right. Hopefully that will be the case when the US hosts a multilateral meeting late next year with its global counterparts then. All right, Professor Choi, as always, thank you so much for your insights today.
Thank you very much.
And Ruy, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you, Sonia.
Right, on that note, we say goodbye. As always, thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.